But at this particular religious site, 1,000 years ago, 50,000 people died at the gates of Somnath to prevent him from entering. So in that sense, the gathering that happened across religious ideologies, across political ideologies, vested interests, people came together to fight together.
Things that they have accomplished, I think we are still way behind.
How can even the gods know? Because even the gods came after it.
This is such a sensitive topic that I feel till today we kind of struggle with our identity of where we stand.
Mayans building pyramids, or the Egyptians, or the pyramids east of Java. There is a technological prowess that they were trying to respond to when they created this. It was influenced by some knowledge, some understanding of the world, which was obviously based on questions that they were exploring. It's almost like where knowledge has been curated and crafted to give your body a physical experience in that space. The old doors that kept our curiosity out have just been thrown open, and who knows what happens the next decade.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. History is rarely just about the past, it's about memory, power, belief, and the stories we choose to preserve. In today's episode, we are stepping into a moment that sits at the crossroad of all four: the Somnath Temple, a site that has been destroyed, rebuilt, politicized, sanctified, and debated for nearly 1,000 years. Our guest today is Priyanka Narain, award-winning journalist at Mint, global religion reporter at the BBC, Columbia graduate, and the author of gripping historical fiction, The Somnath Cipher, a story that beautifully decodes the past while navigating the present. Priyanka, welcome to the Discovery of an Author. So excited to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Let's start with the book, The Somnath Cipher. In your own words, Priyanka, how would you describe the story?
If I had to tell you in one line, it's a historical thriller where temples function as encrypted hard drives. And someone's finally figured out how to crack the code.
Yeah, I think it pretty much sums it up. It has covered like so much. It has history. It has that whole the description of the book is as it says, it's Da Vinci Code plus Indiana Jones, and it actually is that. I felt the story
Yeah,
has
it
like
really is.
everything.
It's a
Yeah.
race through time, and it's amazing how little fiction we need to invent, because reality is just far more interesting, far more complex, and allows for the kind of plot twist that you cannot imagine.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, what drew you to this particular subject? Somnath Temple, and why do you think there is still such intrigue surrounding this magnificent temple even after all these years?
Yeah. Mhm. Okay, so Somnath is a very, very important site for uh, the India that was Bharat, um, that is Bharat, but at that point of time, that was its identity, the Jambu Dweep. In ancient India, Somnath wasn't just a temple. It was in many ways the sort of a rally call of how we chose to explore the world around us. But in modern history, it is beyond a temple. It keeps recurring through our history. You meet it at all kinds of fault lines of collapse, fault lines of revival, of destruction, of nationalism, of how we choose to remember our own past. So in that sense, as a reporter, I felt like this place has so much intrigue, so much complexity, that it allows for the canvas that I was trying to explore at that point of time. But more importantly, it is a first in two ways. One is it's also the first Jyotirling. It is the place where the first Mahashivratri was celebrated. It is the place where you see the iconography of Shiva wearing a crescent moon. That happened at Somnath when Shiva rescued the moon from obliteration. That's also a very fascinating story, but not for here. And the other first was, it was also the ending of the world that was,
Yeah.
because the first really deep civilizational wound that came was through Ghazni at Somnath. And from that point on, over the next 1,000 years, We saw repeated waves of it. But an attack like that fierce, that ferocious, had not happened before. So, in many ways, it was also a death knell of that ancient world. And from this point on, India would enter a new phase where its interaction with the world would not be from a position of strength, but from a position where the country was on a back foot, the civilization was on a back foot, and would have to first lose itself and then try and rediscover itself. So yeah, with a canvas like that, I mean, it was a no-brainer.
Yeah. It's devastating and fascinating at the same time that what all happened. It's really
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. So Somnath has been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. Do you think the reason that you mentioned that it was the first biggest impact on our or attack on our civilization? Do you think that's the reason that Mahmud of Ghazna's raid continues to occupy such a powerful place in India's collective memory?
I think it does. I think you are absolutely right about that, because it was one of those rare moments where it wasn't for the first time. We are constantly told that, we were such a fragmented country, so busy politicking with each other, that we couldn't stand up to invaders. That is not entirely a true narrative, and it's not borne out. Like in 1001 AD, when the first attack of Ghazni happened, we had a huge a conglomeration of kings from across the country who went to fight. They lost that battle, but there was an attempt to thwart him. But at this particular religious site, 1,000 years ago, 50,000 people died at the gates of Somnath to prevent him from entering. So in that sense, the gathering that happened across religious ideologies, across political ideologies, across vested interests, people came together to fight together. And although he had already destroyed the temples in Mathura in 1018,
Yes.
this particular site has had a global resonance because of the location, because of where trade used to happen. It had ramifications across the ancient world, including the Middle East, including the Ottoman Empire. This site was very well known. So it had dramatic economic impact and political impact apart from the religious one.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a big reason why whenever we discuss about Somnath temple, the first I think even as a kid when I used to hear it like about the temple from my parents, I think the main event that they used to discuss was about this raid where the temple was destroyed, the idol was destroyed by Mahmud of Ghazni. So it has such a huge impact on all of us as a civilization as well.
Yeah. And, a lot of it also then comes down to 1,000 years later, the name Ghazni and Somnath are almost like one name now.
Yes.
How do you remember something so terrible without letting it harden into grievance and really sort of look at it as something that shaped the last 1,000 years of the country, and is also an opportunity for us to ask deep questions to ourselves about who we think we are, what is our place in the world, and where do we go from here?
Yeah, yeah. Also, you mentioned about the Mathura temple was that was destroyed here.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
and the that was so terrifying to hear that person that the invaders they're actually saying that to build such a structure you would need so many years and so
Centuries.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
He
still
is
they
himself writing it,
yeah,
and you
yeah,
say, go ahead and destroy it. The wealth of that temple was untold.
yeah. So, one of the most compelling aspects of the book is how temples are portrayed. And as you mentioned in the very beginning as well, that they are portrayed as sites of encoded scientific knowledge and not just faith. So,
Right.
do you think modern India underestimates the intellectual sophistication of its religious past?
I'm going to take a step back and try and answer this from, you see, I think in the book, I'm not saying that they were hiding any secret knowledge, because that would be too dramatic, and also wrong, because the people who were making those temples and who were constructing it, they did not separate knowledge systems the way in which we separate them now. To build a temple, you needed astronomy, geometry, architecture, ritual, music, even psychology. They all lived in that same house. and influenced how the space was made and the objective with which it was made. So, and in this, I'm very influenced by Joseph Campbell's idea that where he said that myths are not really lies, they are not just stories, but they are more a way of exploring um, universal principles. They are questions that man asked when he looked up at the sky and wondered what's out there. And almost as a corollary to that question was the question, what's inside me? And why am I here? And what is the meaning of my life? Myths all come back to and circle these questions. And, you know, this scientific language that we currently think is the right one was absent back then. But these, to me, the questions that they were trying to answer, and this is across cultures, not just India, this is across every culture in the world, whether you look at the Mayans building pyramids or the Egyptians or, the pyramids east of Java, there is a technological prowess that they were trying to respond to when they created this. It was influenced by some knowledge, some understanding of the world, which was obviously based on questions that they were exploring. And to me, these temples become, and these stories become sort of answers that are handed down to us in mythology and in stone. And as someone who has reported on religion for the last 20 years now, I just feel like these temples are not like a textbook response system. They're more, when you walk into a place which is just perfectly curated, it's just the architecture of it is proportionate or is so aligned with the sun that at certain time the sun rays hit the idol's face and go away, or you have those musical pillars somewhere where sound behaves in a certain way.
Yeah.
Those are experiential places. It's almost like where knowledge has been curated and crafted to give your body a physical experience in that space. And that I find truly like riveting. I find that fascinating. It's the Padmanabh Swami temple, right? The Gopuram has 7 windows, and on equinox days, you will see the sun rise through each window and go down through each window, through just that little sliver of space that they have left there. And it's a massive Gopuram, it's 7 stories high. These are not things that I'm trying to, blow out of proportion and make it seem something it's not. I think my understanding is that it was more primal, the experience that they were trying to curate and craft in stone. It's where your body kind of feels it before you can think about it, and that is very fascinating. You go to the Gothic cathedrals in Europe as well. There is a sense of deep peace, like those very high vaulted ceilings, the stained glass, the hush. It flips your body and your psychology, like your mind, back into your body, and it's almost telling you your body has a lot of wisdom. And it's, sorry, I'm going off topic, but when you look at psychologists like Gabor Mate, who are talking about trauma healing and all of those things, they're all saying the same thing, that your body has the wisdom. Your body is always telling you what's working for it, what's not. Boundary setting, when people are teaching courses on it, they are always asking you to go back and say, how does this feel in your body? And it's crazy that the temples and places of worship like this that are calculated to perform this exact role, to bring you back into your body and the experience, the sensory experience of being there. So what blew me away though, Utkarsha, was just how intentional that experience curation was. It was not, they were not writing testaments, although they wrote those. There were books, but we lost those books they were destroyed, they were lost. But this embedded knowledge that exists in our temples, it's turned these spaces that people come into every day, and they become a part of our language. And what is beautiful is where all this understanding of whether it was geometry, astronomy, whatever, has come to, over millennia, come to create communities, build memory. It is now a stand-in for what we knew. we may have lost it, but it's almost like a time capsule that tells you there is a lot to discover right here.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's not even blowing it out of proportion, because the things that like the ancestors, be it like our ancestors or the one belonging to the sun, like other parts of the world, the things that
Yeah,
they have accomplished, I think we are still way behind. Like it's like bringing
yeah,
those things without, and that too without modern tools. And what we brag about so many things that we
yeah,
have, so many discoveries that we have made, but for them to accomplish those things and so much more that we can even think about, we are still studying those things, we are still trying to gather ideas from what they have
other idea.
already accomplished.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that is the most interesting bit, because you read some old manuscript and that manuscript tells you something. It's okay, whatever. It's something that's written, it could be imagined. How do you deny stone? How do you deny the fact that, we are still trying to figure out how they built the damn pyramids? Forget about replicating that. We don't know. There's an 80-ton stone sitting on top of the Gopuram at Brihadiswar Mandir, which was constructed in 1024 AD, around the same time when Ghazni was invading Somnath. It was the process that that stone was brought in all the way from Narmada somewhere, the Shivling, and then the quarry of the Kaveri River was used to make the Gopuram that stands on top of it. It's 80 tons. And until now, we haven't really figured out, was it elephants that went around, or was it like a 4-kilometer bridge that elephants climbed up? Nobody knows. Everyone's speculating. So there are some feats of construction which we haven't been able to decode just yet. We are not sure just exactly how it was achieved.
Yeah, yeah. So, Priyanka, there's another recurring theme in the book, that religion and science are deeply intertwined.
Right.
They are the two sides of the same coin, and this I'm directly quoting from the book, that the ancient Hindus used to use religion to dress up science.
Yeah.
When do you think this separation of these two entities, religion and science, really began in our Indian society, and why do you think it happened?
So, I think in our ancients, I don't think were thinking of it in the way in which I have written it, because for them there was no separation.
Yeah.
There was no language in which you separated deep metaphysical ideas as something else and religion as something else. So if you were to look at the Nasadiya Sukta in the Rig Veda, it's a hymn of creation where it's 7 stanzas, and it basically describes what we know in physics now, as a Big Bang, as a moment of creation, but nobody can answer. The stanza says, you know, how can even the gods know? Because even the gods came after it. It is not a solution that the Nasitya Sutta tells you, "Okay, this is how it happened." It is a question it poses, a question about deep silences, about something before anything. Um, these are the Vedas become religious, scriptures per se, but they were exploring metaphysics in them. So, in that sense, if you look at India before the British, even as late as Akbar's court. So you have Chanakya, you had these guys, the physicists, the philosophers, the thinkers, the geometry guys, the Ayurveda experts. You had I forget the name, but there was one Ayurveda, a famous Ayurveda Vaidya, who would perform surgeries on people. Now you had all these systems of what we call science today, all in the same room. So even in Akbar's court, all of these guys would be there because he was very interested in hearing about various ideas. You had a Dara Shukor trying to translate the Vedas into Persian. So in India, until very, very late, there was no real language to separate what happened in a temple with what happened in daily life exploration of scientific ideas. This is an imported idea. It comes from the separation of the church with the scientists of the Renaissance period, where the theology of the church needed to be sacrosanct, And because the Bible said this is how the earth was created, this is how creation happened, anything that challenged that mythology was not acceptable to them. And hence the persecution of scientists in Europe. And when the British came to India, two, three things happened simultaneously. One was that they dismantled the Gurukul system, from where the transmission of the cohesion of everything, of all knowledge, was lost. Because the British imported this Western view that science and religion are separate from each other, that view started getting a deeper hold because there was no counter narrative left anymore. And church and state, church has gone to war with state so many times in Europe. And over the last 3 centuries, Europe has had an overarching influence. The British have had an overarching influence over how we see ourselves. Macaulay never really made that speech in Parliament that he's accused of making, but he did write a letter to that intent on a separate moment. I think it was for storytelling purposes. The words were put in his mouth somewhere else, but the intent behind it was a disconnection of us as people from the civilization, from the worldview that we were meant to inherit. So that language comes from there. It did not exist prior to this moment in our history. And what my book tries to do is not, it's not about romanticizing the past and saying it's perfect. I think what I'm trying to explore, because I'm curious about it, is what was that older way of thinking about the world? What was that world in which you created knowledge that was layered? It was memory technologies and mnemonic and narrative techniques were used to preserve very complex ideas of the universe or the way the world worked, how they understood it. Whether it was right or not is not something that I'm debating, but just this seems to have been their chosen method of transmuting that language, because we had very strong oral tradition. So it was about memory devices, it was about mnemonic techniques, it was about repetition, it was about creating stories that were about something but were actually telling you something quite different. So in many ways, that is the coding that I find riveting and very interesting.
There's another really interesting aspect, which is the use of ancient ciphers within the story, and like so many
Huh.
ancient ciphers have been mentioned, and some have actually been incorporated within, the
Yeah,
plot. So
yeah.
this use of ancient ciphers in code, it kind of challenges the idea that encryption is, a modern invention. What surprised you the most while researching researching ancient Hindu cryptography?
Uh, hmm. It was so much fun. It was just so much fun. I don't even know where to begin. I was like a kid in a candy store. Um, you know, you look, as a journalist, I've always been very fascinated with what people are saying, and even more importantly, what they are not saying.
Yes.
Because sometimes what they are not saying is just as important, or on a rare moment, even more important than what they are telling you. It's almost like this dance of power that happens, whether it's politics, religion, business, it doesn't matter. That think of Humphrey Appleby in Yes, Prime Minister, right? He is running these circles around the Prime Minister with his bureaucratic speech of like endless reams of words that sound very supportive, but are actually designed to the exact opposite purpose of thwarting whatever the Prime Minister. And there you see institutional power in a dance with elected power.
Yeah.
And the person who usually wins, although Jim Hacker catches on along the way, but the person who usually wins is the guy who knows how to use words to conceal motive. And when I was doing this research, what surprised me was how absolutely practical Indian cryptography was. It was um, it was not something the mystics did in some deep Himalayan king of how to encode or make a cryptographic this thing or whatever vision of the universe that they have. It was something that cold, it was strategic, it was meant for statecraft. So when Alexander was invading India, Chanakya was creating a spy network that was reliant on various ways of concealing information, of saying one thing, meaning something quite different. And you start to see all of these written in the Arthashastra, and it blows your mind. It's like it's a very complex, highly accomplished world that starts to emerge just through the nuance of the cryptography that they were using in order to secure political borders, in order to trade favors, in order to thwart an enemy. So to me, it became very, very clear, very, very quickly that this civilization was not a passive one. It was actively defending itself. It was managing diplomacy, espionage, psychological warfare. All of this was going on 2,300 years ago. So I don't think I was surprised that encryption existed. I think what surprised me when I started researching was that it was an institutionalized process.
Yeah.
It was something everybody did. We tend to think really highly of ourselves. That it's just a modern digital age anxiety where all of us are under the scanner and we are all fair game. And that's, I think, the difference. Earlier it was targeted. Now everyone's fair game.
Yeah.
But I think ancient India had understood something that is fairly contemporary. That power isn't just about armies, it's about containing information. Who can read it? Who can't? Why not? So once you see that, then a lot of what looks like religious symbolism or poetic obscurity, it starts to look very, very deliberate. And once I saw that, it was very hard for me to unsee it. I saw it in the structures of everything.
Yeah. How did they do it? It's so fascinating.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. And still at that point of time, no other communication devices. Book cartography was also used, where certain, those palm leaf manuscripts were, there would be one stick with some random numbers. The other guy would know which manuscript is being discussed. And based on the numbers from that book, the message would be decoded.
Yeah.
It was just ingenious. It was just ingenious.
So this book also discusses the politics of 1947 behind the reconstruction of Somnath Temple. My God, that was so interesting. Again, like I went into this deep hole, googling everything. But yeah, it talks about this politics where Nehru saw Somnath's reconstruction as backward looking, whereas Sardar Patel saw it as a civilizational healing. And then we had Gandhiji intervening between these two thought processes. So it was, again, very, very interesting to see how different political leaders viewed this whole subject. Talk to us about it. Do you think like modern India still struggles with this same ideological divide?
I'm going to come to that last question in a bit. I'll just go through the story because that is so interesting and so pivotal.
Yeah.
Because at independence, we were coming off 200, 250 years of our history, our story being
Erased.
deliberately, aggressively erased, whitewashed, transformed, given a Western lens to judge, and the absence of our own, systems of education, also made us more susceptible to the narratives that were being crafted about us by other people. We were not shaping the language around who we are. Today we talk about branding. Each one wants to become a brand on their own. What are we doing? Basically crafting the narrative about who I believe I am and what are the parameters through which you should look at me. That was gone for India. And so you had on one end, and it was a very, very diverse ragtag. I mean, the kind of odds stacked against India surviving were enormous. But the substratum of it, what connected everyone, was not language, was not food, it was not political borders. It was this. This became the glue that no one saw coming. For Nehru, he wanted the country to adhere to I think what the world regarded as valid.
Yeah.
And you had leaders like Patel who were like, you cannot look for validity and in an external facing way. That sense has to come from within. And those are the two things that were actually at that. It's almost like two parts, again, symbology of it, but two parts of the human psyche where we seek someone else to say, hey, you're doing a great job, while the other one's like, I know I'm doing a great job. In October of 1947, the Nawab of Junagadh went off to Pakistan, carrying a small plane on a small plane. All his dogs. He left his wife behind, but all his dogs were on the plane with him.
Yeah, another very interesting subject, but yeah, please continue.
And Bhutto was left here to handle the negotiations with India because the moment he signed the accession papers in Pakistan, technically Junagadh became a part of Pakistan. But when the Nawab had announced that, he's planning to join Pakistan in a Hindu majority kingdom, the Hindus of that kingdom had created something called as a parallel government. So there were these three elements. There was the Indian state, there was a parallel government of Junagadh, there was Shah Nawaz Bhutto, who was the stand-in for the Nawab. And in November, when the tanks rolled in, the parallel government asked the Indian state to intervene. And when the tanks rolled in, Shah Nawaz Bhutto fled. This was 7th of November. 2 days later, Kanhaiya Munshi, who was also an MP at that point of time, the founder eventually of Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, and he took Patel to the banks of the ocean, not the bank, but the seashore of the Arabian Ocean, uh, where the ruins of the temple were sitting. And the condition was so bad because for 250 years, there were no temple bells. Ahilyabai had set up a stand-in for Somnath Temple,
Yeah.
where worship would happen, but when it was not being prosecuted. And so it was very ragtag sense, but there was something about the place, about the roar of the ocean. It moved Patel tremendously. So he right there and there went there and he said, I swear that this temple will be remade. It rallied the country, but it put him at direct odds with his prime minister. And because we all know the story of Patel being asked to step back and allow Jawaharlal Nehru to become prime minister at the request of Gandhi, that dynamic was a little fraught anyway. And Nehru went to Gandhi saying that our first actions as a new nation, 2 months into, cannot be reconstructing temples. We have too many other things to do, and we don't want to be typecast as a Hindu government, especially because we are having this this partition based on.
Yeah.
So Gandhi said that's fine, just as long as state funds are not being used to reconstruct. It's really none of your business. This is now a democracy, so let them gather up funds from whoever they want. And as long as they're not using the Indian government money to reconstruct it, that basically and effectively blocked Nehru from intervening anymore. And then there's this beautiful like collection of everyone's donation. What people did with the Ram Mandir, kind of one brick from this village, one brick from that village. This was a similar effort that happened across the country at a very difficult time in our history. And eventually, Patel was dead by the time it had to be inaugurated. And they invited the then president, Rajendra Prasad, to come and do it. At that time, Nehru wrote a letter to him, forbidding him from attending. That as a sitting representative of the Indian government, you cannot go. So the president had to come up with a tactic where he put in the ledger that he's going to somewhere in Rajasthan, then diverted his plane midway and attended the inauguration of the temple. So it's full of little political intrigue. But what I see in it, deeper beyond the people involved, is the battle for what would this new India be? who are the people who are going to shape how we see ourselves in the world, how we see our past? Because Nehru's objective was to convert the ruins of Somnath Temple into a monument for Somnath Temple. So
Okay.
allow it to transform into something that is gone and historical. While Patel was like, this is the civilizational heartbeat.
Yeah.
If this dies, the civilization dies. So it has to be resurrected. And in that, you see this dance play out, right? Of how do we see our history? Who gets to define it? And what do our choices tell us about who we are going to be?
Yeah. Yeah. And
But
still, yeah, yeah, yeah. Go ahead,
no,
please.
sorry.
No, no. Very rightly mentioned. I am so amazed by the thought process of what because this is such a sensitive topic that I feel till today we kind of struggle with our identity of where we stand in the world, and what is acceptable, and what is by the mainly by the Western world. I feel what is acceptable by them, how we should be, how we should behave, and then struggling with the identity, the place where we came from, and because we kind of lost it to all those invasions and all those attacks, that we actually kind of lost touch with that also, and then we are struggling with our identity, with how people perceive us. Yeah.
Down. Yeah. Yeah, because this is the thing that I feel people talk about invasions, the loot that happened,
Mm.
the temples that were broken. For me, I think the real place where we took a huge hit was the burning of the Nalanda library.
Yeah.
9 million manuscripts were burned over 3 months, 10,000 students killed. I mean, this is the size of a Stanford library today. And we stand at the base of Kailash Temple and look at that monolithic structure that was made top down into the earth. And we just stand astonished. We just gawk at it like, how did these guys do it? But in those 9 million manuscripts that burned, there were texts on architecture, there were texts on Ayurveda, there were texts on astronomy, on physics, on all kinds of things, and in the loss of those texts, in the loss of those stories, we lost touch with the why. So um, we have inherited the rituals because that was the only thing that was easy to pass down,
Yeah.
and that has survived. But the why of the ritual is gone when these books went, when the people who had studied that knowledge for decades were gone. Um, and that was the hinge, right? The why are we doing what we are doing? If we understood the why, it would be easy to reclaim our identity and our place in the world.
Mm.
Without the why, it becomes very easy for anyone looking at the civilization to say, to run it down, to ridicule it, to say there's no sense in all this. They go around worshiping snakes and cows. We've heard that. You and I
Yeah.
have grown up in a world
The
where
land of snake charmers.
land of snake charmers and elephants and these were derogatory
Yeah.
ways to talk about a country that at one point of time accounted for 26% of the global trade. The Roman senator has written like a public letter to Romans in the first century saying, please stop buying Indian things because our coffers are being emptied on the Indian shores. So uh, it's these are stories of our history that we have not heard.
Mm.
We have heard the bits uh, that seem ridiculous, that seem like, heathen, as the British like to call India, heathen population. So not only was there an eroding uh, of our identity, there was an erasing that happened as well, and it didn't stop there. A new narrative was crafted to provide the scaffolding to hide what was lost.
Yeah. Yeah.
And mm, whether India struggles with that same ideological divide, I think short answer, yes, cautiously, I think. Um, but that that struggle is no longer hidden.
Mm.
That struggle is out in the open and it has resistance. you will find, I think India itself is now at a pivotal moment. It's a liminal space where our engagement with the past has been binary. Like, it's either we treat it as very reverential myth. We were the most amazing civilization on the earth. We invented everything from zero to to planes and whatever. I mean, the claims just go on. Or you have that colonial critique. It's just frozen, right?
Yeah.
And of snake charmers and heath in population, and the British brought civilization to it. Where India either appears as this, incredibly powerful figure that then became a victim with no agency at all. And both of these ideas are so flattening to the complexity of real life. It feels almost offensive to any thinking person because the world doesn't exist in binaries anywhere. Why should it exist in a civilization that's whatever 1,000 years old?
Yeah.
It's almost an infantile approach. And I think now we have a new generation of writers, historians, filmmakers, and frankly, readers who are hungry, who don't want to be given the same comforting narrative, who is more willing to look at ourselves and say, yeah, we messed up there and we messed up here, and who don't think of history as something that has to be sanitized and perfected as some glowing la belle epoque of the past, but something to learn from and something that can inform us on what we did not know about ourselves.
Yeah.
It almost provides a choice that, hey, you think you just have to be future facing, but that future will be shaped by what you learn from looking at the past.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of anxiety around on these kind of conversations. The conversation we are having right now is not an easy one to have. It will make a lot of people very uncomfortable because it doesn't sit in any of the binaries.
Mhm.
And I'd say parts of India are ready. That there is the danger is if it becomes too shrill, too prescriptive, too it's not a fringe conversation anymore, but it's sort of finding its place on the main stage. But the danger, I think, is really for it to become shrill, for it to demand closure too quickly, to come to some conclusion. Because when you're talking about a nation as diverse, as complex, as lived in as India, it's going to be layered, yeah. It's going to
Yeah.
be sophisticated, it's going to be contradictory, it's going to be sometimes brutal to look at our own history and say, we really messed up very badly there, or there will be shining moments where it's just incandescently brilliant. The danger also is if you only look at the brilliant parts and don't look at any of the others.
Yeah.
And the danger is if you look at the brutal parts and say, that is the whole truth.
It feels like the times that we are living in right now, it's sometimes it feels like it's kind of overcompensating for everything that we went through and the mindset that we had earlier about our civilization. Now it's kind of like everything is, as you said, that it's on the brink of, or maybe in the danger of becoming a little shrill. But
Yeah.
yeah, I see your point as well that at least we have started talking about it, and then there is a set of people who would not engage or indulge into both of those extremes. I would actually want to learn about what.
Actually
Yeah,
curious.
yeah, exactly.
Like not approaching the question with, it's almost again where you can't go into the story with your mind made up.
Mm.
You have to be willing to ask the questions, the tough questions, um, demand the same toughness of analysis from yourself. Have the humility to recognize that not everything will appear to you or will emerge that will make you happy. But this is not about making you happy. This is about finding the truth, and truth has a cost. It always does. But the muscle to hold many stories together, that's the weightlifting we need to do.
Yeah.
That let's not um, insult ourselves by thinking that we can only think this or that.
Very beautifully aptly put, I'll say. So since like we are talking about our civilization, so India has endured, repeated invasions, the destruction of temples, centers of learning, and vast bodies of literature, as you mentioned, Nalanda, which set back intellectual and cultural progress of our country by centuries. And I feel we have like kind of discussed this topic, but yeah, I still want to, understand your point in this. So, in trying to preserve what survived, we may have held on to the traditions, as you said, like glorifying, yeah. So, without fully understanding the logic that goes behind them. And today, a younger generation that is questioning and asking for a reason behind things, they
Right.
are they sometimes feel disconnected with those traditions, or maybe with some of those customs that they don't connect it when they don't connect it with a reason.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
in your view, is unquestioned faith still preferable than the absence of faith altogether?
Absence of faith and unquestioned faith. I I don't think that frame is right, because it's too extreme, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ha-
My
Unquestioning faith and no faith at all. See, look, I think as a journalist,
Yeah,
as an investigator,
I'll just say
uh,
this, that this question also comes from this place where sometimes we kind of have those conversations with our parents or our elders as well, where
yeah, yeah, yeah,
they want you to like
yeah.
you talk about a particular custom, you talk about a particular thing that okay, you need to do this. Like, why do I need to do this? What's the
Why
reason
do
for?
I do
Yeah,
this? Why do I need to do?
yeah.
No,
So
you're so right. I didn't mean it as the
yeah, yeah,
question per se.
yeah,
It's just, I felt it was too binary
yeah,
again.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
No,
and
the question feels a bit binary. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, we've all done this. I
Hmm.
have teenage girls,
Yeah.
and you know, these are conversations we constantly have.
Hmm.
But I think I don't do belief systems.
Hmm.
I do inquisitions of belief systems. So, my instinct has never been, should we believe this or that? My instinct has always been to ask, what was it trying to do? And See, as I mentioned earlier, rituals came down to us not because, Indians were anti-reason or didn't want the logic to it, but when our libraries, our learning systems, our universities were destroyed, these knowledge systems were broken. And I don't think that we've all come to terms with that
Yeah.
deep wound. It's a deep reality, which we don't give enough thought to. That it is not that the answers are absent,
Hmm.
the answers were lost or destroyed. And which is not to say that all questions had an answer, maybe some of them didn't. But it's also not that nothing has any reason. And uh, when kids sort of mock some ritual as irrational, or I I wouldn't jump to defend a ritual. I also don't rush to kind of dismiss it. Um, I do what I tell them what I do, which is find the story. Like, what's the entire story? Trace the origins. What was it trying to encode? Ask it tough questions. Was it trying to serve some fasting thing, for instance? On this day you fast. Maybe there is a health benefit. Maybe there is ecology. Maybe there's something to do with the psychology that meditation is encouraged. That go watch your breath. Now modern mindfulness language comes in, and you start to see it echo what was being passed down to
Yeah.
us, that okay, sit in the mandir and for 5 minutes, or just ring that Tibetan gong and listen to the sound. And it's like, what are you talking about? But as you get older and you discover how it influences your sense of well-being. So I think it is important for us to ask questions, to find out the data, then decide whether it's serving you or not. And I don't think that unquestioned faith is healthy. It's but reflexive rejection also. Just
Hmm.
reflect. If it has been recommended, I will not do it. That is also not the best place to be, because it doesn't serve what is innately human in us, which is curiosity.
Hmm.
I cannot tell you what's right for your life. That's for you to decide. But when you decide whether an idea is oppressive, or if it's obsolete, or I don't know, liberating, first make sure that you've understood the facts, as many as you can find. put it into practice. If it works for you, that's great. If it doesn't work for you, drop it. It doesn't matter, because none of the Vedas give a damn whether you believe in them or you don't. It's about finding what is resonating with you. Whether it's the Vedas, whether it's a Bible, whether it's the Quran, it really doesn't matter. It's about what is speaking to you and aiding your human life today. And I feel we owe ourselves that curiosity. It's almost like a minimum entry point into experiencing life. Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's my 2 cents on this.
No, that's true. That's very right, actually. Like I think from both the ends, like for the older generation to push something,
Yeah,
if that is not correct, then for the younger generation to outright like deny everything and outright reject it, even that is also not the right way to go about it. Like
yeah,
there has to be
yeah.
a balance in between.
And there has to be conversation.
Yes, very important. Absolutely.
Conversation. Like it doesn't have, मैंने बोला तो ये होना चाहिए. It's a nonsensical way of approaching life, and आपने बोला इसलिए ये नहीं होगा. That is also a nonsensical way of approaching life.
Yeah, but sadly, that that's a big part of all of our lives. So you have incorporated so many facts within this book, within the story, this thriller. You this must have been a mammoth task, I'm sure, but deeply interesting one.
Absolutely,
Yeah. So,
absolutely.
so what? Like, could you walk us through your research process and what went into crafting the story? And part two of this question would be, what part of your research shook you or like unsettled you?
Mm, okay. I think it's a great question. Thank you for giving me a chance to talk about it. Y- I've been reporting on religion for 2.5 decades, but um, even as a child, I was very interested in mythology and um, in again this sort of symbology of things. So in many ways, I don't think this research was a phase. Like it's almost something that's in culmination of all this work that I've done over my career, and the story was slowly revealing itself to me in bits and parts. I just didn't know what I was going to do for it, but I was coming to fiction from journalism, right? So my instinct always is to start with documents, the court judgments, the document of accession, Aurangzeb's farman to shut down Somnath Temple, the colonial correspondence that was going on, temple ledgers. Like I tend to think in terms of documents first. And because I've spent so much time reading around temples, around places of worship, not just temples, but whether it's churches or madrasas. I read around them before, and those usually shape the way in which I approach the story or the questions I ask about it. Um, I've found the footnotes of people, like little letters people have written. Panayalal Munshi had written to Sardar Patel. The footnotes of history is where some of the best stories are they're really like treasures lying buried there. Um, but I think in terms of what unsettled me in learning all that was how fragmented, firstly, information was and continues to be. We don't have the kind of, you look at the Vatican Library today, it's a repository of 2.5 millennia of documents going back, predating Jesus. And we've not done that. We've been taught only to see it as a story of sort of faith, destruction, reconstruction. But when you start, sort of looking at the story through very, very closely, you will see that it's a very layered story. Like where the book begins, and in the IIT GPR that happens, IIT Gandhinagar has done a GPR of Somnath Temple. Everything that I have written in the book
Yeah.
is truly discovered. In fact, it was that story that sparked the start point for this one. In December 2020, which is when the book starts, there was an article, you can see it in, where they found like 3-storied structure buried under Somnath through a GPR. And there were 4 sites, the same 4 sites that I mentioned, they are there
Yes.
in the official IIT Gandhinagar GPR report. Um, So there's so much layering, so much. Uh, the temple endowments are a story in themselves. Um, there is economic strategy involved in how the gurukuls were tied to the temples and how that ecosystem operated. And in many ways, knowledge has survived because it sort of, became enmeshed with ritual, unexplained ritual. But um, I think that reframed a lot of things for me. Like the Padmanabh Swami temple, right? The treasures that were discovered there in 2011 in a single vault.
Yeah.
Um, when I met the person who was in charge of the accounting of it, he's now the sitting governor of Bengal, and he was like, "I cannot give you an estimate of what its value is because I have no conception on how this antiquity can be valued. It cannot be put in a number. It's all this 25 billion worth, 50 billion worth, 1 trillion worth. It's like, I have no idea. There is just no way to be able to comprehend it. Um, I think we dismiss a lot of what we don't understand as superstition because it does not fit the Western category of science. We dismiss the accomplishments of a very complex, sophisticated, evolved society um, to its inexplicable rituals. We judge very, very evolved approach to life and philosophy through the lens of words that were taught to us by outside parties. We see our world, our history, and our story through their lens, not our own. So at some point, I think I realized I was not writing about the past. I was writing about amnesia. Uh, it- it- we've collectively forgotten and chosen to forgotten and remain in that state of forgetting. Again, Campbell talks about mythology as a public dream. And I don't know, these mythic spaces where stories are told, they become they become the dream of people who are living in it. And from there, almost futures are forged, but at the very least, dignity is restored when the story is told.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to make you feel anything. The story stands on its own two legs, but the story deserves a place where it is told.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, clearly I've done a lot of thinking about all this.
I'm sure. So, Pia, our protagonist, she kind of mirrors your, journey
Hmm.
and also your journalistic instincts, I guess, in many ways. How much of
Yeah.
Priyanka is in Pia, and have you ever gone to the lens that Pia went to? I mean, of course, not like the exact lens that Pia went to, but yeah, to or maybe risk your life to chase a story or to find truth.
It's a question I get a lot, actually. And I'm going to try and answer that in a way that doesn't turn Pia into some sort of dramatic version of my life. Uh, but there is a lot of me in her. Not in the stunt kind of way, or, there were no car chases in any of that in my life. Um, Pia isn't a character where, some me chasing danger of any kind. But I think she in the sense that we are similar is that we tend to I tend to push past a point with my curiosity. I cross the line of comfort very often, and that instinct to keep pulling that thread, until the whole thing is unraveled. I don't know. It's even when that part is mine. Uh, have I risked my life the way Pia does? Not in a cinematic way. Journalism usually isn't like that, but the danger is quieter usually.
Yeah.
As I've experienced it, there will be some sources who suddenly stop taking your calls, or you're advised to politely move on. Someone just like turns around, like, just be careful there. The concern is not usually just concern, it's a signal. It's they're
Back off.
saying something to you. Yeah. And I learned that pretty early on. When I was reporting on the Ram Setu, it had what had looked like a cultural, environmental, maybe religious story. It was touching something more sensitive. It was so I was on that Ram Setu, and the Indian Navy showed up. Um, and when you see an institution respond like that, um, um, that's the moment when the mythology of the Ram Setu, or the power of the Ramayana, or the power of the sitting Indian government, whether Ramayana was history or not, all of those questions don't remain abstract anymore. They become live wires. Um, you know, but you report because that's what you're there to do. And um, even with Godman to Tycoon, which was about tracing belief and money and religion and authority and how they intersect with each other through the story of this one guy, um, you realize how power threads itself through all of this to create structures that protect some people at the expense of many. And when you see that, you have no choice but to speak because that's the job. And I think in that sense, Pia comes from seeing the world in that way. Um, yeah, but I've been lucky. I've had some great editors. I've had people who've had my back, regardless of what was going down. And in that sense, I feel very lucky because not everyone trying to speak truth to power gets the kind of support they need to be able to push through.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Pia is
Because
not my alter ego or anything. I'm one character.
do you think being a global religion reporter helped you write about Hindu traditions, both with intimacy and distance?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I think it's precisely because of that duality. Being a religion reporter, it trained me to hold very different instincts in one moment. Where you understand the language, you understand the rituals, you understand the emotional gravity of someone from the inside. Um, but at the same time, it also trains you in that distance, that discipline of stepping back and um, questioning and being curious and asking people you know really well very, very uncomfortable questions about why they think about things in a certain way. And most importantly, not romanticizing parts of things that speak to you as a person, to separate the person from the reporter, where uh, conclusions are being made, um, to not judge, to feel a profound human connection with the person or a belief system that you are writing about, without letting it shape the words that you're going to speak. So reporting on Islam, on Christianity, Buddhism, a bunch of new age cults that are all around us. I think I started to see deeper patterns of how power, gets consolidated in an
Yeah.
institution or an idea, or in the case of cults around a person, how the mythology of that person is created, how you see parallels of the myth creation and branding that happen. In the case of a guru, you have to say myth creation. And how institutions then really work so hard, they harden around um, anything negative, anything that you are revealing that they don't want revealed. Again, it goes back to what is told, what is not told, um, and how it directly impacts the power base of the person or the institution. So for me, cultivating, learning, and adhering to that sense of discipline, of that distance. I think it has helped me evade blind reverence for anything, but it has also helped me um, not be cynical. Um, because eventually the people who choose to believe in a system, an idea, a text, they are deeply human, trying to navigate their life and are finding some path that is allowing for them to move through the world with a little more ease. So one can never forget um, the impact. Sometimes the intent can can be questionable, but if the impact is definitely um, providing ease, not numbing but ease, then that is a human condition. That is our human condition, and it to that understanding, I feel a deep sense of loyalty and a reverence for whatever can provide that. Um, but it also meant that when I came back to writing about Hinduism, Hindu traditions, it was it was very easy for me to neither defend nor explain. I was just trying to listen for the cadence of an idea being spoken through a story or a sophisticated knowledge system, trying to understand what problem it was trying to solve. What would that world have been in which this problem needed solving? Um, it helped me look at history through a different way. It helped me look at um, because it changed the way I started looking at power. It sent me off into a longer investigation into what repositories of power were the temples. So it changed the lens in which through which I started looking at India's history. So I mean, it's given me so much the ability to be able to have um, this intimate understanding and distant reporting of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean,
Yeah.
I came back home with a very sharp eye for incongruity, but also a lot of tenderness.
It gave you a better understanding of this this big institution, or the thing that we actually grew up in. But did you find it you said that you found it easy, but to look at uh, Hinduism or this culture from a distance, and still be empathetic towards the people who are who are following it. And
Hinduism in any, it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter. It could be, people following a guru. It doesn't matter
Mhm.
because the function that was being served in their life, the impact on their life was of a certain nature. And I think because I've done this for so long, it's become so easy for me to not judge. Um, and it's that reporting, worldview. It's a
Yeah.
very shrinking kind of reporting that I'm talking about because everyone these days wants to become an op-ed writer and, shape the way people think about the world. I belong to a slightly older school of reporting where I don't think it's my job to tell you what to think, but it's definitely my job to try and bring you as much information as possible.
Yeah. So, like, what happened with our protagonist, where she was like told to follow another story, where she wanted to follow another one, right? Where she was actually pushed to follow the Kumbh Mela story instead of the Somnath Temple one. Uh,
Yeah.
has it ever happened with you where you have been like discouraged or straightforward, like been told not to follow a certain story or not to chase a certain story, either due to internal office politics or maybe due to some higher influences?
It happens all the time. It happens all the time. And frankly, if it's not happened, then you haven't chased the right
Right.
stories. No, I say this with all humility. You have to be forbidden from writing a story. Then you know you're telling a story that's worth telling.
Yeah.
Um, there were moments where the pressure was very, very unmistakable. I've been called into boardrooms, told directly to drop a story. There have been armed guards standing outside when a source has threatened me to stop writing. Um, I've been worried for my safety. I've had my share of death threats and all kinds of things. But these are dramatic outlier experiences. They're not par for the course. They are unusual. But as I said earlier, I've been very lucky with my editors as well. I worked with people like Raju Narisetti, Mitra Kalita, who know that pressure doesn't disappear, but they would stand in between me and that pressure. It gave me, it allowed me to keep digging. Um, so, if they were being asked to soften a story or delay a story, should call me like, "Are you sure about this story?" It's the only question. Reporting is solid, right? And the answer was yes. They would go bat all the way. And experiences like this of having people who've got your back, those are the ones that shape a journalist. It's not just the threats. It's not just the people telling you to back off. It's the people telling you to keep pushing through.
Yeah.
And I think that tension between intimidation and integrity is an inevitable part of any reporter's life. Um, no heroes or villains per se, but systems trying to bend and break and in the service to itself. And that usually is control and power.
But your
So
experience kind of gives a little bit of hope to, all of us that like still there are people out there who are chasing the truth and there are people who are willing to support them in their journey because otherwise we'll be lost. Yeah.
absolutely. No, I feel profoundly grateful for having had that in my life.
So, Priyanka, do you think India is finally ready to engage with its past without turning it either into a propaganda or denial?
I think, yes, we are getting there, but we are not there yet. I think, as I mentioned earlier, for a long time, we've been afraid of our past. We've softened it. We have apologized for who we are. We've minimized our idiosyncrasies. We've treated each other with disdain when someone's studying in a vernacular school. We've not respected the complexity of language and history that has come from different parts of our country. And we've told ourselves a very controlled story, a story that was designed to control us. Um, it's not exactly denial, I think, but I think we have definitely avoided looking closely at ourselves. And now, of course, the pendulum is swung in the extreme direction, where there is this urge to reclaim all of history, declare ancient India as the La Belle Epoque, the perfect age of all history. And I understand that because, when it's like when something has been compressed and you
Dips
release
in, yeah,
it's going to swing wild
yeah.
first. Um, but that overcorrection can, there's a danger in that. Again, because there's a likelihood of missing the truth. You can't think of history in terms of glory or grievance all the time. There can be some of it, there is some of it, but that's not the whole picture. And somewhere stopping to engage with the various voices, explore what the texts are truly telling us, connect the dots that were disparate but actually are related with each other, the forces of history that were shaping the world at that point of time. It's just a different kind of storytelling that's going to be involved here. But I do feel hopeful. I see more people, even at Jaipur Lit Fest this year. You had a lot of conversations around these subjects, around Sanskrit revival, and who are the people. So there is appetite for it. There is curiosity about it, and there is hunger to know more. I can't think of a better place for thinkers, writers to come in and historians to come in and kickstart the conversation, sort of take the lead on talking about these ideas of how did these ideas travel from one part of the country to another? How did it stitch this part of the world together? Um, what really drove these people? What was the kind of world that they were trying to build? What was it that um, that made them unique and at the same time connected with each other? The real maturity, I think, is in being able to hold complexity and complex answers, ability to sit with truth that makes you extremely uncomfortable at sometimes and euphoric at the other, and still be equanimous in in whatever you discover, because this is almost like the way a doctor would do an investigation into a really sick patient. Can't, oh, blood report is great. Okay, let's get euphoric. It's, there is a certain distance
Yeah.
until all the facts are there, and then the meaning making can start on what does it truly mean to have this information. Um, but I do think that the fact that it's happening at all, it's happening publicly, it's loud, it's messy, and it's sometimes quite frightening. Um, but just the fact that it's happening, something shifted, right?
Yeah.
That the old doors that kept our curiosity out have just been thrown open, and who knows what happens in the next decade.
Now, after this beautiful beautiful story, now this is like already out for readers to discover
Yeah.
and to enjoy. So Priyanka,
Mhm.
what's next? I think we already got a glimpse of it in our previous conversation, but yeah,
Yeah.
what's next?
No, I think this is really just a beginning for me. I feel like I've just scratched the surface. Um, what this project has opened up for me is a bigger question. It is, how does knowledge travel? How does power hide in plain sight? How and why did civilization choose to encode what they most wanted to protect? And going forward, I think I'm going to be interrogating history with these questions, sometimes through fiction, sometimes through nonfiction. But I think this intersection is suiting me quite well, history and belief and power, whether it's political or economic power. And I think there's a lot there to discover. So I'm going to be busy for the next couple of years at least. And then we'll see what happens next. But there is a second part to this book, which I'm writing right now.
I'm so excited.
Me too. I'm super excited and very pumped.
Priyanka, thank you so much for this deeply thoughtful and engaging conversation. The Somnath Cipher doesn't just tell a gripping story; it invites reader to delve into and question history and belief with far greater nuance. It's been a pleasure exploring all these layers with you. Thank you so much.
So much. It was such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for having me here.